Hey there, thanks for joining us for our free ACT webinar. We're really excited to share with you some quick tips and strategies that you can use to feel more confident and have more success on this week's test. Now, we don't usually encourage you to wait until the last minute, but totally understand that life gets busy and sometimes that's how it works out. We make absolutely no guarantees here, but I am going to share with you, after working with hundreds of students over the past few years, some of the strategies that they found to be absolutely the most effective and really helped them to answer several more questions correct. So hang around for the next 15 or 20 minutes. I'm going to jump in and demonstrate a few quick tips. Hopefully that's going to help you to do your absolute best on the test this week.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our free webinar. I am going to jump in with just a few video clips for each of the sections or the 4 core sections of the ACT. I want to be able to kind of demonstrate and show you live what tips and strategies you can use and then how you can actually apply those on the test. So I'm going to hit play on the English video first and we will get rolling.
Okay, we're going to jump right in with our English strategies. So on the English portion of the ACT, I think probably a lot of you know this already, there are 75 questions. You have 45 minutes to complete those, and they're broken into 5 separate passages. So tip number 1, pretty straightforward, is to go straight to the questions. I do still have some students who want to try to read the passage first, but really in the English, for any of the comprehension questions, we have another strategy that we can talk about if we have time later for how to answer those. For the most part, we want you to focus in on jumping right to the actual question. When you go to the questions, the next thing I want you to think about are 2 pieces. 1, take a look at the underline portion and put parentheses around the sentence that you're looking at, because one of the most important things is going to be that you read the entire sentence through from beginning to end. Some mistake that many students make is that they try to actually just replace the portion because of course on the English all we're trying to do is find the best possible choice to replace the underlined portion. And what students try and do is just kind of read a little portion of it and it sounds fine, but sometimes what we're missing is that there's something grammatically wrong or it's not a complete sentence. And so if you don't read the whole thing through beginning to end, you're not going to pick up on that and then you'll end up choosing the wrong answer. Okay, so once you've got your parentheses marked off, and I know that's hard for some students, but it takes a quick second and it's definitely worth it because as you can see on some of the questions, because the ACT writers try to get the questions to kind of line up with the spacing of the paragraph, they will put kind of a random space within one sentence, which for a lot of people can be confusing. So you're saving yourself a little bit of kind of brain and mental energy if you get those parentheses there, because each time you go to read back and replace, you're going to really quickly be able to find the start of that sentence and then get yourself all the way through. All right, so the next strategy that I want to talk about is how you actually approach the questions themselves. So we all know that we're going to be trying to just replace the underlined portion, but what I want you to think about is setting yourself up for kind of framing what type of question it might be. So I want you to go to the answer choices, do a quick skim of these, and ask yourself what's different between these answer choices. So if we look at number 2 and we skim those, what's different is that they're choosing different transition type of words. So are we contradicting? Are we proving? Are we adding information? That's where your brain should be headed. If you look, for example, here actually at number 5, the difference is that they're changing the words after the word freezes. So they're changing it to either be a complete sentence or not a complete sentence. And so we're already kind of thinking, oh, I better pay attention when I go back over here to the sentence, to that spot where the punctuation is, and then the words that they're changing right after. Another example is if some of the strategies are going to apply differently if you have an introductory question as opposed to just replacing the underlined portion. So in this case, we're not actually replacing the underlined portion, but they're asking us a question. We're going to use different strategies for those types of questions. Another example, let's go back down here to numbers 12 and 13. You can see here for number 12, if you did a quick skim, what they're changing is the actual punctuation being used. So we're already framing up that we want to be thinking about complete thoughts or independent or dependent clauses. So do I have a complete sentence or do I not? Because that's going to determine what kind of punctuation I'm using, if I'm using a comma or a semicolon. And then colons we'll talk about too, most likely in the longer version of the webinar. But what we're going to do is go back to that question or to that section in the paragraph, mark off our sentence, and then we're going to really be looking at what is affecting the punctuation that we're using there. Okay, so the last strategy that we're going to talk about for the English section in this webinar is conciseness. And so for those of you who are familiar with the word, it really just means short and sweet. So overall, hands down across the board on all types of questions for the ACT, they want you to say things very directly. They don't want you to add extra commas. They don't want you to add extra words. And if it's a longer sentence that you're replacing, they want you to say it in the most direct way possible. The example we're going to look at here is, let's see, we'll do a few of them. So we're going to start with number 8. Okay, so the conciseness rule is, it's a tricky one because our brains, when we take standardized tests, are kind of programmed to start at the first option and replace it. Second option, replace that. Third option, and try those all out. But we're not going to use that approach on the ACT. We want to save as much brain energy as possible and decrease the amount of time we're spending on our questions. In addition, we want to kind of eliminate all of that second guessing that's going on when we continue to read and read and read all the different answer choices. So if we've got a quick strategy like this one, you may as well use it and move on to the other questions that might take a little bit more time. So if we mark off number 8, beginning and end of the sentence, first one we're going to try is the shortest one. We said short and sweet. So the shortest options are, and I didn't mention this before, but for the no change options, you can't rewrite all of them, but just pretend and treat it equally. Pretend it's just the same exact thing that they have in the underlined portion. Don't get thrown off by that no change. Don't feel like you should pick it a lot or you shouldn't pick it a lot. I know a lot of students talk about being nervous about that no change option. They're really just trying to save themselves from retyping the whole entire thing. So pick one of the shortest ones. We can try forms, we can try forms. So what that's done is that set us up to say, okay, it's probably going to be one of those, unless one of those is terrible or both of those are terrible or one doesn't work, then we'll go on to try the 2 longer ones. When we're looking at form versus forms, that gives us the next indicator. Okay, now we're framing it up to think, I need to look at the form of the verb and does it match the actual subject. So we're going to just try forms because it's the one at the top, and we need to then go back and find the true subject. So in 2009, Liebrecht and Arnold's experiments revealed that triangular snowflakes begin with the same process of chemical bonding and forms a hexagonal shape. So what's forming the shape? This kind of goes into the rule about subject-verb agreement, which we'll talk about in the longer version of the webinar. What is doing the forming is our main question. So if we go back, the experiments revealed that snowflakes begin with the same process of bonding and form. So begin and forms. What's doing the forming is the snowflakes. Snowflakes is plural. Do snowflakes forms or do snowflakes form? In that case, the answer becomes pretty clear at that point. We've got a nice short one that works. We're not going to add these extra words because they're not necessary. And I'm going to show you just 2 other quick examples before we move on to talking about the math section. Going to number 8, so we're still on the conciseness strategy. The rule is pick the shortest answer, try it. If it works, choose that one and move on. Don't try to replace it. You'll start to second guess yourself. So shortest answer for number 18 is option J. We're going to go here, try option J. We tried to steady ourselves with our walking sticks, but slipped and stumbled with each step. We tried to steady ourselves with our walking sticks, but slipped and stumbled with each step. Does it work? It does. There's no need to add extra information or extra words. That's our answer. And we will look at one more just to kind of drive home that point, because this is one where you can get 4, 5, 6 more questions correct, which is potentially going to boost your English score, sometimes by 2 or 3 points, depending on the scale for that exam. So we will take a look at number 40 here. So if we look at number 40, mark it off. Quesada helped his village with the money he earned selling pottery, but he wanted to do more. Does that make sense? He wanted to do more. Yeah, absolutely. Pick that one, move on. Now we've saved ourselves from having to read that question again and again and again and go back through the entire sentence. We've saved time, we've saved brain energy, and we're getting the answer right and moving on.
It's so hard not to go into all of the details in every single strategy because there's so much that we can do to kind of boost the score. But I will say that with the strategies that we just went through in the English and the ones that we're going to go through for the other sections, you will be able to see a difference in your score if you can really embrace and apply those. So want to make one comment about practicing. Definitely before you jump in and actually try using these strategies, I highly recommend you pull the practice test, either if you have some from previous practice, or go onto the ACT.org website and download the Preparing for the ACT. I think that that is going to really help you to look at the actual questions, try out these strategies, and even just see if you can figure out which questions they apply to. That's across the board for all 4 sections. We'll go a little bit over 15 minutes. I know that I said this was a 15-minute free webinar, but I think we're going to be more in line with 25. I do think at the end, you're going to be really set up to feel good about approaching the test this week. So I'm going to jump in with the math and we will go from there.
For the math section on the ACT, we unfortunately do not have time to go into all the basic content and fundamental math skills. However, we will do just some short and sweet strategies that you can use that will kind of reframe how you approach the math test and should help you greatly. So, math test of the ACT is 60 questions, 60 minutes. They used to say that the first 10 were a little bit easier, the last 10 were a little bit harder. That's relatively true. There's always a harder one in the beginning, so don't get thrown off. There's always usually an easier one towards the end. And we'll talk about a strategy for identifying and moving quickly through those in a few minutes. So for the math portion, just a few quick tips. Number one of the things the students find to be absolutely most helpful is because of the number of word problems that you're going to see on here. Lots of times that's a lot to process and can be overwhelming when we just look at a bunch of words and numbers. The easiest strategy to manage that is to go to the very end of the question first. So as soon as you approach the question, instead of starting at the beginning and reading all the way through, jump to the end to try to get a feeling for what they're actually looking for, so that when you go back up and read the actual question and actually process and pull numbers and information out, you're already kind of thinking ahead as to what you're trying to accomplish with the problem. That works really well, even for some of the shorter ones. So if we ignore all the numbers, our brain isn't getting wrapped up in all the words and numbers in the front of the question, but we look at the very end and it says, what is the mean of these monthly fees? Translate, mean is really just average. So there's a lot of just decoding and translating of words in the math section. Sometimes it sounds a lot more difficult than it really is. And then we'd be able to just go back, get the numbers we needed, number of total, and calculate the average. Another example here of that, just really quickly, is picture, lots of words, we've got decimals in here, go to the end of the question. How many inner layers are there? So now we're already thinking, okay, hang on, I've got to think about the inner layers. This is very tiny on this specific problem, so you might want to even set it up where you're kind of either redrawing it or thinking, okay, now if I want to get a visual on this, I need a little bit more space so then I can start to label everything as I read through the actual problem. So that's a really quick strategy that you can use, which helps significantly in kind of saving that brain energy and brain power that we talked about, because the ACT is a long exam and we don't want to have to overthink things if we don't need to. Okay, we talked a little bit about this. Try not to get caught up in the wordiness. I'm going to throw another example up here. Lots of times what they're saying sounds more complicated than it is. So they'll say, for all of the following real numbers such that the domain of the problem is ... when they really just mean find x. So try not to get thrown off when they have some of that vocabulary. So one quick example of this is number 23. Which of the following expressions is equivalent to? Some people will get wrapped up in this terminology and just start to go, expressions, equivalent, what does that mean? What does that mean? Really, all they want you to do is solve it. So if you see something that's working with variables and your brain goes, oh, I need to simplify, I need to solve, just start crunching and running with it, and you will move in the right direction. Okay, one other note that I want to make that's really important, and I know that it sounds kind of obvious, on the math test, write on it, draw on it for the whole ACT like we talked about in the English section. You can write on this booklet. So make sure that you do, because it's going to help you to really see what you need to do and then to make more educated guesses, even if you don't remember a certain formula or how to approach a problem. Look at number 39 here. They're asking about let's see, I like to use actually number 41. So for this diagram up top, they're asking us about which of the following vertical lines cuts it into two trapezoids with equal areas. So I'm thinking vertical line is going to cut this shape into two equal areas. So the best thing for me to do is going to go ahead and mark on here and make some connections. So if I say, okay, there's a 2, there's my x equals 12, let me draw a line so that it looks like these two are kind of equal, and that's going to move me a lot closer in the direction of finding the right answer because I can see that it's pretty close to the number 7 given the perspective that we have here in the scale of the actual axis. And then we look down at the answer choices and you can see the closest one to 7 is 6.5, which is the right answer. Another thing that's going to really help here, if we look down at number 46, again, circle keywords, draw on the test, sketch out a picture. That's going to really help you to visualize what's going on. If when you look at that problem, a lot of students tend to kind of get thrown off by the fractions and the words, and then they get, a little bit overwhelmed. When you start to draw it out, it doesn't seem so bad. And the last tip for the math that we're going to go over is to oversimplify. So if they give you something that looks a little more complicated, for some reason fractions really kind of tend to throw us off sometimes, try to oversimplify it and just ask yourself, all right, well, instead of f of g of 1/2, what would I do if it were f of g of 3? As soon as I write it that way, most students who are sitting with me will say, oh, I know what to do. I just plug in the 3 to the g function, so I'll put that in here. And instead of 3 in this problem, we're just using 1/2. So now it kind of leads you to say, oh, I know exactly what I need to do. G of x equals 1/2. And then you can solve the problem from there. We've got a few other strategies. I will make one note as we talk about some of the translating and decoding and kind of getting that language to be a little bit more simple. I'm just going to use the top of this page here. If they throw things in like x is a positive integer, just be thinking x is greater than 0, x is positive. So just oversimplify, because sometimes the terminology, like we said, can really throw you off. Or if they say the word parallel, sometimes they really just mean it's the same slope. So if you're looking at equations of lines, be thinking, oh yeah, same slope, and then translate that into saying, oh, m. The m is what represents a slope in a standard y-intercept form. So those are just a few quick tips on the math section. Oh, you know what? There's one more I wanted to go over. I'm spending most of my time on the English and math because those are the two most concrete and consistent, and those are a little bit easier to kick your score up in, as opposed to the reading and the science. We've got some basic strategies, but those are a little more variable as to what content and what topics you're reading about. So the last thing I want to mention for the math section is if you are concerned about finishing, or you feel like you're getting hung up and spending too much time on a problem and then not figuring out the answer anyhow, I like to use the easy, medium, hard approach. So that approach is we go through the test. If you see a question, and you think, oh, I could solve that, no problem, go ahead and do it, get your answer, move on. Come across another one and you look at it and you think to yourself, I could probably answer this, but it's going to take time, and I need that time to spend on other questions. I'll come back later. Mark it with a medium. Move on. Do the ones that are easy. If you come across one that you look at and you know you have just never learned this, you aren't going to wrap your head around it, there's no way, then you have an option of just guessing or marking it with an H for hard. So then your strategy would be to go through and complete all the ones you know, circle back, complete all the ones marked with a medium. If you have time, circle back and complete the hard ones. And that way you're saving, if in case you run out of time, you're saving those hard ones that you may have missed anyhow to be those ones at the end that you may not finish or that you have to actually guess on.
I'm sure you noticed we spent a little bit more time on the English and the math sections, so we're kind of at that 15-minute point, but I do have some strategies for the reading and the science. Those are just a little bit more strategy oriented, so I'm going to go through some options for those in a minute. If you like what you're seeing and what you're hearing, we do have a 60-minute, actually just under 60-minute full version of the webinar. It's a paid version, but we're going to dive more in depth into these sections and show you additional strategies and more examples to help you really apply these when you get to the test. So I'm going to pop that into the sidebar. If you have any questions, pop them into the chat window. I'd be happy to answer those at the very end of this seminar or workshop. So I'm going to go ahead and play the videos for the reading and the science sections, and then we will wrap up at the end.
All right, for the reading and the science sections, I'm going to move pretty quickly. I used a lot of our time on the English and the math, and it will be worth it, but we're certainly going to be over 15 minutes. Reading section, so 35 minutes, 40 questions. It's split up into 4 passages. There are 2 key pieces that help the majority of students who feel like they're struggling to kind of get through reading the entire passage and then going and answering all the questions. So the first strategy we're going to talk about is using, I call it a keyword approach, but basically if you feel you don't have time to read the entire passage, I would suggest that you read the full introduction, read the topic sentence of each of the following paragraphs, and then as you read, just make little notes in the margins to yourself so that you kind of get a feel for the bigger picture so you can tie the paragraphs together and answer those comprehension related questions. Or once you get to the questions, you know exactly where you need to go in order to be able to answer that question because you have an idea of what's covered in each paragraph. So that's what I call the keyword approach, which sometimes will save you a fair amount of time in reading the whole entire thing beginning to end, knowing that you're going to have to go back and read some of it anyhow. The second strategy for reading I want to mention is one where several students get many more questions correct because it's a little bit of a trick that they put in here where a lot of the questions, if we look here at number 10, kind of have 2-part answers. So just making sure as you're reading the answer choices that you're checking that both portions of each one are true, because sometimes the first part of the answer option will be true and the second part will not, and that will negate that as an option. So just pay very close attention to that, and you can see that's in number 5 as well, and many of the questions on the reading. The science section also uses that approach. So if you look here, the narrator's father worked at his designing board, mother took the narrator along. Is this true? Is this true? Make sure they're both true if you're going to select that as your answer. A lot of students will read the first part, say, hey, it's true, circle that one, and then end up getting the question wrong. For the science section, quick things that are going to just save you a lot of time and a lot of brain energy, which I keep mentioning, but we know is so important, especially as you get close to the end of the test. This beginning portion you may need to look back at. My advice is that you, on the passage information, and here we have 35 minutes to answer 40 questions, similar to the reading. You're going to want to move relatively quickly. There's a lot of information. My number 1 rule on the science is do not overthink it. Don't try to get too much behind the actual science. Rather, keep it to just pulling out the key information and using the charts and the graphs. So when you get to the science section, I would jump straight to the questions. Make sure that you're writing, circling keywords. As you draw the lines in, it's going to help give you a visual. So here they're asking, what if it were 12%? There isn't a 12% on here for strain X, but if you look at strain X, for study 3, they're telling you right where you need to go, and you draw in a line, you're going to be able to answer that question very quickly without overthinking all of the words that are within the question. And similar to the math, I do like you to go to the end of the question first, because again, there are some really wordy questions in here. So going to the very end so that you know what you're looking for is going to be very helpful. And like we talked about with the reading section, making sure that you are looking at both portions. So on the yes/no questions, you're going to want to try to rule out the second portion or use the second part of the sentence before you go back to the yes/no's. The yes/no is important, but a lot of students try to answer yes or no real quickly and then overthink it, or they don't pay attention to what's really important, and that's in looking at the details and the differences between the answer choices. And then you can go back, is it consistent with this prediction that odors would increase lifespan, and answer the yes/no portion once you've decided which ones of these are accurate. Other things on the science section, for the most part, it's just going to be, like I said, keeping it simple, drawing those lines, and lastly, when you have graphs and tables, making sure that you're paying really close attention to what information is here, because the questions are asking you about 5% versus 15%. You're seeing that's the main difference between these two. Or if they're looking at the percent alive versus number of days, sometimes they'll ask a question about the percent that are dead, and so you would need to kind of look at the percent alive and then just flip that. So those are some real short strategies just to keep you focused on keywords, big picture. Don't overthink it. Don't read too much into it. Don't read this beginning introductory information because it's going to take so much time up here at the top, and you're going to spend all of that time trying to understand and process and then lose the time on the actual questions, where I'd rather you kind of spend all of that brain energy that we keep talking about so that you can really look at what's different between these choices, what are the trends in the data, and then have a better chance of getting those questions correct.
Okay, so that wraps up the 4 core sections. If you are watching a replay of this free video without the offer and you can't see that, you can check out the link either below the video or in the post. We do have the full 60-minute version available for $30 as kind of a special. So if you click that link, it'll redirect you to purchase that, and then you just have to sign up for the webinar, and it will send you a link to the full 60-minute, actually it's about 55-minute video with all of our comprehensive tips and the additional tools and strategies. So check that out. If you found this to be really helpful, definitely help us out by sharing, posting it, spread the word so we can help as many students as possible. This is kind of the real straightforward, quick and easy strategy-based work that you can apply to really boost your score. And again, we have found with all the students that we've worked with over the years that a few of these strategies, when they're applied, can really result in several more questions correct in each of the subtests, boosting your score. So I just want to remind you really quick before we jump off, even though the ACT is an important test, and I realize that, it's still just a test. Most of you had the opportunity to take it again, so try not to put too much pressure on yourselves. I see students coming in all the time after they take the test, and they end up having panicked or stressed out in the moment, and they put all of this pressure on themselves to do their best and felt like it was their last chance, and they're just putting so much pressure that they kind of shut down, or they get to the test in panic, and then they fall back into their old habits instead of staying calm, take a breath, sit back, whatever you need to do, and calling on the strategies that we talked about here. Don't forget to try them out before you walk in. But the most important thing really is to kind of stay in a calm and positive mindset so that you can just look at the big picture strategies and not fall back into overthinking and then really affecting or impacting the outcome of your score. It is not a reflection of how intelligent you are. I see students all the time, and we talk about how they have all these great assets and skills that are going to serve them well in life, but sometimes students just don't do well in standardized testing. And you might be one who's going to do really fantastic, and you might be a student who just doesn't do well on standardized tests. Try to let some of that go and just realize that it is a test. You're going to do the best that you can. These strategies should definitely help. And if you have any other questions at all, hopefully you'll benefit from the 60-minute webinar, but certainly shoot us an email. My email address is probably posted in the comments, but lisa@efscoach.com. EF is in Frank, S is in Sam, coach.com. Thanks so much for joining us.